Alright, so good afternoon everyone, and with this we are in lecture 16, which is on smart cities, and we have already covered smart cities in the previous lecture, that is lecture 15, but here we would be discussing the critique and contestations surrounding this doctrine of smart cities and also specifically Indian smart city mission. So, the concepts that will be covered in this lecture, or the route map that I will be following, would be around this critical evaluation of the smart city concept and smart city practices and actions. So, the first question that I would like to raise here is how smart are the smart cities, and I will be sharing my acronym, so I will be sharing the elaboration of this acronym SMART. This is my own formulation. So, we would be using this formulation to basically see whether these smart cities are really smart or not. We would also discuss the limits of technology and data driven design. If you remember the previous lecture, we had discussed that how the smart city absolutely relies upon information communication technology and also IoT, which is Internet of Things, and everything here is data centric and technology enabled smart programs and smart actions. So, but can technology and can data decide everything? So, if we are overpowering technology and overpowering data and it is outweighing social and other environmental parameters, does this smart city conceptualization really make sense? So, we would definitely be discussing the smart city discourse from this particular perspective. So, finally, we will be kind of this lecture would surround around a critical evaluation and qualitative assessment mainly across several parameters. So, mainly the three parameters of economic, social and environmental parameters or components. So, how these components have been really addressed in the smart city program that India is, I would definitely say, currently obsessed with. So, yes, this is I think like SMART. If we elaborate SMART, so SMART can stand for specific, measurable, attainable, relevant and time bound. So, now if we take each of these parameters again and see how smart city design or smart city plan actually kind of pertains to these specific components, we will be able to understand the larger dynamics of quote unquote smartness so far as Indian urban environmental template is concerned. So, specific, it is kind of imperative that each city should actually have its own narrative. So, the specificities are very, very important for particular urban scapes or for particular cityscapes for that matter. But is this smart city agenda or the smart city discourse properly addressing the so called quote unquote epistemology of particulars? So, this is a question that we will be raising here, and also try to find out what is actually happening so far as the execution of the smart city plan is concerned. Then measurable and attainable variables, measurability and attainability, these are also very important variables that should determine the success of the smart city agenda. So, we will, but who would who would determine these indicators? So, and what about the authenticity question? So, these are also some questions which we really need to raise and think about. Then relevance, so far as relevance is concerned, like this smart city concept or the idea or the plan is actually relevant, would be actually relevant for whom and at what cost. So, to which section of society would the smart city be able to cater to? So, this also brings us to the question of the larger rationale or relevance of the smart city program for particular sections of the Indian society, and also you can understand that as this is part of global vision. So, this is not definitely limited within the Indian contour, but it definitely has a kind of an international outreach. So, we will see this when we discuss the involvement, participation and engagement of transnational funding agencies, organizations and actors in the smart city story. Then time bound. So, again the major question is that is it always possible to really come up with time bound solutions for timeless urban phenomena and complex processes. So, this is also another important question which social scientists mainly need to pose before bureaucracy, technocracy, and also I mean people who think that the whole story should be understood from the technical point of view. So, this is a question I think I would like to put in front, that whether it is possible to provide time bound solutions to complex urban processes and phenomena which are actually timeless. So, let us think about this. Now, one should remember that when immediately when this smart city idea was launched or floated in the union budget of 2014 and 15, opponents they critiqued this idea, and there was like large scale criticisms, and critics and their opinions, it swept, it flooded the Indian scene. And like urban experts like Ayana Datta, for example, considered this smart city to be the 21st century utopian urban experiment, right. And the three major criticisms that opponents had warned us with, or they are apprehensive about, are that this smart city would actually entail economic competition on one hand, social polarization on the other, and of course though this corporate giants, they are kind of spinning this slogan that smart is green and smart is sustainable, but we really need to think about ecology and how ecology will be impacted by these smart city projects, and whether through the implementation of these smart city projects there would be a metabolic rift, whether a metabolic rift would be created between nature and society at large or not. So, these these are three important perspectives: economic perspective, social perspective, and environmental perspective, and we should also remember that they are not disparate components here, they are also embedded, they have a whole lot of integration. So, it is important to also take into consideration what the opponents are really warning us with. And in this presentation I am going to discuss as I mentioned, and it is also there in the title of the presentation, that we are going to discuss the contestations surrounding the smart city discourse and plan and mission so far as the Indian context is concerned. Yes, so if we take a look into the financial part of it, the economic part of it, I must say that this is the ever first program under MOUD, which is this Ministry of Urban Development, where it has been mentioned, and if you access the website, smart city website of the government, you will find that they are mentioning blatantly that they are actually kind of they have floated a competitive concept. So, the way through which cities can actually avail funding to become smart cities, it entails whole lot of competition. So, cities can only be selected through this challenge mode or competition method, and this competition would there are two stages through which this competition would take place. So, stage 1 is all about the intra-state challenge, which means that the state, Indian states or maybe union territories, within any particular Indian state or within a union territory, cities there would be a scoring criteria, right. There would be a scoring criteria, and cities would submit proposals, and as per the strength of each proposal, scores would be given, and this would be mainly determined by the state and states advisory committees and advisory bodies, and those cities which will be able to score good, they would be shortlisted, and they will only be able to make it in the next round or the second round, which is the city challenge round. And I have quoted here from the smart city website itself. So far as stage 1 is concerned, the official website, it announces or it proclaims that the highest scoring potential smart cities will be shortlisted and recommended to participate in stage 2 of the challenge. So, as I mentioned that so the whole shortlisting will be done on the basis of the scores that each city would actually get, and the highest scorers would would then be able to move on to stage 2 or the second round. And the second round is all about city challenge. So, where cities from different states or union territories of India would finally compete for the final round, and they would draft and submit smart city proposal, and a whole lot of components should be there. So, they have to show a model, and here they also have to mention that and justify that what kind of development they want, area based development or retrofitting model or greenfield development. These are the strategic components. If you remember, we had already discussed in lecture 15. So, here the cities have to make a model where the cities would flesh out that what kind of development would suit them the best, and the rationale and the logic has to be provided in the smart city proposal, and it has definitely to be very much in tune to the vision of the larger smart city goal. And this is very, very important. So, one important component is that in the smart city proposal has to show that how several stakeholders were consulted when the proposal was actually drafted. So, this is one important part, but another important part which is very, very crucial here is that, again I have quoted it from I have taken it from the website. So, it said what is the proposal for each city which will be competing in the second round or the last round, that what is the proposal for financing of the smart city plan. So, this finance part becomes very, very important. So, what is the proposal for financing of the smart city plan, including the revenue model to attract private participation. So, this would be one of the most important determinants determining whether the city would be able to make it in the final round or not. And Ayana Datta, of course, like the urban expert, the urban critic of the smart city discourse, Ayana Datta says that it's absolutely visible here that how this kind of a competitive approach, it demonstrates neoliberal ethos, and here cities compete to kind of attract foreign capital and also attract local investment companies and partners. So, this is the present day neoliberal entrepreneurial urbanization, which is absolutely in tune to corporate interests and aspirations of corporate lobby, and not in tune to the to larger social benefits for masses. So, yes. So, with this I move on to another book which I have recently read, and this is by Frank Webster. So, and this book came out in 2014 sorry, and the name of this book is Theories of the Information Society. So, this book is very interesting, and if possible you can at least go through the introduction of this book. And here Webster, he says that the present society is actually an information society. And he also tries to understand the relationship between data and information on one hand and cityscapes on the other. So, what is the relationship? What is the interrelationship between cityscapes and information? So, and the major question he raises in the introduction of the book is that what determines or what kind of or what are the parameters or indicators that actually explain that a society is an information society. How would you say that this particular society has become or has achieved the status of information society? So, then he says that there are 5 dimensions through which one can explain this information societies. So, and he said, so these 5 dimensions can also be considered as 5 attributes of the information society of our contemporary times. So, the first dimension is technological. And what does that mean? It means that all of us are facing it. This is the present reality of placeless connectivity. So, what is placeless connectivity? So, we remain connected, but through this is wireless connection, no electricity, it is not like electricity grid, it does not really require a gross level, but at the same time the technological apparatus is also very, very complex. So, this duality and ambiguity is also very much there, but what is more important is all about placeless connectivity and how everything is being determined by technologies like sensors, cameras, etc. And economic, for example, again how this information economy is very much shaped by advertisements, research and development, etc. Similarly, like occupational. So, how again occupational work, so far as occupational work is concerned, we know that we know how this there has been a spurt, a rise in the service sectors like telecommunication, computer engineering, etc., and how it has also has opened market for engineers working in these particular sectors. Again, spatial is also very important, because spatial it's all about geography. So, geography of so it is all about like information networks connecting homes, different other locations, schools, marketplaces, etc. So, how a seamless integration or a seamless and wireless connection has been crafted and forged across locations. And finally, he also talks about the cultural part or the cultural component, where he says that previously we used to get information, or even we used to become entertained through television. So, television was a very important mode of information, providing information and entertainment, but now there are so many other means, and now we do not really need to sit somewhere to gather information. We can move. So, the mobility, the mobility quotient has absolutely changed, because now information, we can actually track information from several devices, including our mobile phones, laptops, Walkman, iPods, and the television with mobile phones also have come to our hands. So, this has been a major change, but apart from all these discussing these various attributes and dimensions, Webster also talks about the nature of this information, and he says that the nature of the information is that it is not floating information, but it is codification. That is how information is transmitted from the source to the receiver through this seamless integration of this kind of placeless connectivity. Again, another warning that is there in this book is that there is too much of quantification. So, it is absolutely dependent on quantification of information into huge data sets. So, these data sets are all outcomes of quantitative techniques, and they are all numbers. So, then the final question is, do numbers speak it all? And there is inadequate or almost no qualitative meanings and interpretations. We do not get any qualitative meaning and interpretation infused with these kind of quantitative data sets. So, do numbers speak it all? I think I will be able to better explain this in my next slide, which is on, alright. So, this is also by Haag, where he says that it is not me, it is the data. So, how data dominance or domination of data is actually one of the major indicators of our contemporary urbanocene. So, yes, so I think like this robust quantitative information and this quantification of information into huge data sets with no inadequate qualitative meanings and interpretation infused to kind of to make these data sets significant. I mentioned that I will be able to better flesh it out in my next slide, which is on data driven networked urbanism. And so, I am quite influenced by the work by Kit Chin, which came out in 2015. So, he has talked about this data valence, and he also talks about in the program City, he talks about the relationship between information and city like Webster, and he says that how contemporary urbanism, especially or urbanization, especially through this capsule smart city projects, is actually facilitating data driven networked urbanism rather than data informed urbanism, right. So, cities are have become like sites of data generation, huge data sets, we are now exposed to huge data sets, and because like lot of technological, whole lot of technological sophistication has been accomplished. So, like sensors, cameras, GPS, teleportals, and this several other technological devices every second these devices are actually tracing and tracking data. But then the question is, so this data valence terminology is so very important. So, of course, you can understand that this is a word which it's an outcome of the fusion between two words, data and surveillance. So the question, the major question is that, so cities have transformed into sites of data generation, but this data, is the statecraft using these data only as it really cares for us, or through this data is the statecraft also trying to control us. So, I would like to draw your attention to the picture that is there in the right hand side of this particular slide, and I think this illustration or the picture explains it all. So, it is very important for us to also remain aware of this data valence. And another important fact is that this urban data is sometimes it is very selective, flawed, and it is politically infected. Again the same question, that how can we ensure the authenticity of data, and does data or numbers have the capacity to convey and narrate everything. So, again the same question that I raised in the previous slide, that do numbers speak it all. So, it is very important for us to understand that why and how data is being tracked, why and how such huge data sets are being generated, and whom is it actually benefiting. So, this is a crucial question that we need to raise or ask within the context of smart city, because smart city is technology enabled and technology driven, and it is data centric. So, with this I then move on to the more social criticisms that talk about that bring to the fore this social question, and it says the experts like Ravindran and Anudatto and Himanshu Bharte, they directly they say and they show and demonstrate that how these smart cities will actually it will increase and aggravate social inequities rather than solving or addressing social exclusions. So, it would cause a social apathy, and the smart city vision is dystopic, it is inequitable, and so for example, we can use a very interesting or a powerful metaphor here. So, the metaphor can be of having islands of having islands of these smart cities in the middle of the vast sea of poorly services and impoverished villages, right, in the Indian subcontinent. So, and this kind of this islands of smart city would definitely the outcome will be the juxtaposition of citadelization, ghettoization and gentrification. So, this will juxtapose the emergence of citadels, ghettos and walled communities and walled spaces. And so, definitely they are visible forms of spatial inequities. We cannot deny this fact. So, we have to accept this fact that they are in these programs, in these plans, if you take a minute look, you can immediately see how spatial inequity is very much kind of embedded in this whole doctrine and discourse. So, and this will definitely engender social violence and mistrust. And here I have quoted from Bharte that where he says that a class based, you just take a look into this blue quotation, the quotation in this blue box. So, Bharte says that it is a class based spatial categorization of population. The outcome is will be class based spatial categorization of population. So, world class urbanism of smart cities for the upper classes and the creaky old urbanism of existing cities for the creaky old middle and lower classes. So, that is why smart cities have been explained as isolated satellite cities of the neo middle class. Yes. So, now I will move on to the final dimension or the environmental dimension, which is the metabolic dimension. So, again I must say that metabolic rift, if some of you do not know about what metabolic rift is all about, maybe first let me give a little bit of background, and then I can draw your attention to the facts specific to this particular discussion on smart cities. So, metabolic rift is a concept which was actually used by, or which has been borrowed by John Bellamy Foster from Karl Marx. So, and it talks about, so Karl Marx had talked about two major contradictions in our society. So, one contradiction between capital and labor, and the other contradiction between man, or you can also use woman, and or human beings, for example, human beings and nature. And these two contradictions are also related to each other. And John Bellamy Foster, he is a very renowned like Marxist environmental sociologist, who has talked about, I mean, so if you read his books, so he has written a book called Marx's Ecology. So, there he has used this metabolic rift concept. So, he has also written articles that also talks about metabolic rift concept. So, and through this concept, we get an idea that how the capitalist mode of production has actually created this rupture between the functioning of the human society and the and how, I mean, and the functioning of environment, right. So, the metabolism that was there between nature and society in the pre-capitalist period, it has been lost, it has been ruptured under the capitalist mode of production. So, that is a major idea. So, we do not have scope in this course or in this particular lecture to go into details of metabolic rift, but metabolism, by metabolism or urban metabolism, it is all about the relationship, the deeper relationship of the city with its larger ecological infrastructure or with its environmental template for that matter. So, I just came across a very interesting article which has been recently published in the International Journal of the International Journal of Sustainable Built Environment. So, it is an Elsevier journal, and this article has been published by Randhwa and Kumar. So, this is there in the reference list. So, please go through this article, because I think this is only one major work that talks in detail about about how the issue of sustainability has not been adequately or properly addressed in the smart city plan. So, what if you go through the article, it is a technical article, and you also you will see quantitative tables, tables that are outcome of regression and which they had applied in this particular, in writing this article. But these are the key findings which I have taken from them, and then they say that no mention of key terms are there, if you see the smart city guidelines and the smart city policy. So, in the SCM, that is smart city mission statement and guidelines, there is no mention of key terms such as green space, biodiversity, etc., and climate change as well. So, that is what they are saying. So, we can also kind of cross check and validate it, because this article also came out in 2017, and it will also be important for us to see if there has been further development in the last 3 years or not. But Randhwa, Kumar, they specifically mentioned that they could not find any mention of key terms like green space, biodiversity and climate change. I will also provoke you to cross check it. And so, they also say that the sustainability quotient is inadequate or insufficient in the smart city mission guidelines if it is compared to other missions and programs. So, for example, they also discuss the sustainability indicators or the environmental components that are there in UNDESA, for example. So, United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs. So, they have compared it. So, they have made a comparison of sustainability indicators of smart city mission with the United Nations Department of Economics and Social Affairs, that is UNDESA indicators of sustainability. So, the article shows or discusses that while UNDESA has 6 environmental components including natural hazards, atmosphere, water, ocean, seas and coasts, biodiversity and land, SCM only has 3 environmental components: energy, atmosphere and water. So, again they say this, so their final argument in this article is that this doctrine or this policy or mission actually lacks concern towards the natural environment, which is otherwise a very important dimension of sustainable development of a city. So, though this corporate lobbies and also the bureaucracy is punning slogans like smart is green and smart is sustainable, but if you really do a very proper critical assessment, you will find that it really lacks concern towards the natural environment, which is an important dimension of sustainable development of a city. So, this is the final slide in this lecture, where I would like to draw your attention to this concept of disembeddedness, and here I am actually drawing from Polanyi, Karl Polanyi, and his very renowned book called The Great Transformation. So, in this book called Great Transformation, Karl Polanyi talks about, he also makes a comparison between capitalist economy and economies which function in the past societies, that is in the pre-capitalist societies. And he says that in past societies, economy was not disparate from society or social relations. Even it was not even a kind of noticeable or identifiable category. So, it was absolutely enmeshed in social relations, but it is from the time of capitalism, and if we see capitalist economy, that then capitalist economy actually is or it became absolutely disembedded from larger equation, from its larger equations to the society. So, it started functioning as quote unquote loose and autonomized, remaining blind to the workings of society, or remaining blind to the society at large. So, there is a kind of a blind mechanism here, and everything is determined by the market, and market is overpowered and determines almost everything. And so, he talks about this disembeddedness, and I argue here that the smart city doctrine or the smart city discourse and the smart city mission, this is also very much disembedded from the larger political, cultural and environmental template that India actually offered. So, here urban problems are only understood as technical problems, physical problems, but unfortunately, if we go through the guidelines in this SCM, we will not be able to say that that the political context, cultural context and social context are very much there. So, it is disembedded from the larger political, cultural, social and environmental context of the Indian subcontinent. And finally, I would like to draw your attention on this particular book again, which is there in the right side in this slide. So, this book is called Sustainable Urbanization in India. So, I edited this book 5 years back, and during that time only this whole lot of cynicism, criticism on one hand, and on the other hand whole lot of glorification of this smart city discourse was going on, because it was absolutely fresh and new during that time 5 years back 2015. And so this is actually an outcome of a conference, of a 3-day conference that took place in my previous institute where I used to work before I joined IIT Kharagpur. So, this is the Institute of Development Studies, Kolkata, and I organized a conference on this particular issue of sustainable urbanization, very much in tune to the gospel of sustainable urbanization which was floated by the United Nations during that time. Here the major argument that this book raises or makes is the very fact that why it is important for us to concentrate or to plunge into the micro political settings of each city, because each city has its own narrative. The smart city discourse, it will blind you with the fact that the same size fits all. It provides a kind of a same size fits all solution. But this is very reductionist, and definitely if you start understanding problems of urban scapes from the same size fits all kind of a lens, then definitely your lens is dystopic and it is reductionist. So, this book through several case studies across various cities from western, eastern, northern and southern India. So, cities like Vizag, Hyderabad, Bangalore, and also small cities like, for example, Patna, and other cities like Ahmedabad, Kolkata, Mumbai. So, from various case studies here we have discussed that why understanding each city's particularities, or understanding particularities and intricacies of particular urban space is very important to identify challenges and opportunities that are available in within specific urban contours and contexts. So, this epistemology of particulars remain a very important perspective or lens for us to understand or to capture micro political urban realities, so far as the huge, diverse and complex Indian urban and Indian urban environmental scene is concerned. So, these are the references, you can go through some of this, and this is the conclusion. So, in the conclusion I would like to highlight that this presentation has covered or has discussed the inadequacy or exclusions in the smart city agenda, discussing economic, social and environmental dimensions. We have covered this we have used these 3 parameters to understand the exclusions or inadequacy of the smart city program, and we have discussed the problems associated with quantitative data sets that portray data as apolitical and neutral. So, why qualitative dimensions are important, and then we had also discussed the rationale behind pursuing in-depth explorations of micropolitical settings which should shape urban planning and development discourse than the same size fits all solution at national scale. So, thank you. Please go through some of the references and plunge yourself into and delve deep into these inadequacies and exclusions that are embedded in the smart city discourse, because it will be important to know both the technical and the social concurrently. So, I encourage you to go through the references to have a more clearer, to have a clearer and sharper understanding of contemporary urban environmental scene. Thank you.